Let's talk about hair covering, Christian veiling versus hair covering in the Jewish tradition. What's the difference, and what's the rationale behind each of them? If you're a Christian, you know that 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is the source for hair covering in the Christian view. It's where Paul writes about the importance of a woman covering her head. Now, different Christian groups have different interpretations. Some groups, such as the Oneness Pentecostal, will look at this passage and they'll say, a woman's hair, that's the head covering that Paul is referring to. It is her glory, it is her head covering, and they will leave their hair uncut and long, and that will be their interpretation of this passage. However, there's other groups that come along and say, what are you talking about? Paul was referring to an external separate head covering that goes on top of the hair. And this contention within the church has led to many variances in the methods of covering. Some groups in church history have covered in a burqa-style fashion, even covering the face and the neck. Other groups do a little prayer bonnet. There's a great variance. Now, as a Jewish woman who speaks about why Jews don't believe in the tenets of Christianity, it doesn't really concern me if a person chooses to cover one way or the other way, or to go in the modern Christian path of not covering at all. What I am interested in is, what is Paul's rationale for covering? And thankfully, Paul tells us very clearly exactly what it is. It has to do with submission. The head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. This is verse 3 in chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians. Everybody understands that the woman is submissive to man. Paul delineates a pecking order, and the woman is at the very bottom of the totem pole. Now, I actually want to veer away from head covering for just one moment to point out something very fascinating inside of this passage. In Paul's totem pole, he's revealing to us that he doesn't believe in the Trinitary concept, and he also doesn't believe in modalism. He doesn't believe that the Father and Son are equal, and he doesn't believe that the Father and Son are the same God who take different forms. There's a clear hierarchy here. There's the upper God, and there's the demigod. There's the great God and the man God. This is very clear that Paul was totally into the Greco-Roman mindset. He was not into the Nicene mindset, and he wasn't into the modalist mindset either. That's just a very interesting point that I really suggest that you go think about. Paul did not believe in the Trinity. Let's get back to Paul's pecking order. All throughout his epistles, he writes very negatively of women, such as in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for women to speak in the church. Or in 1 Timothy chapter 2, let the women learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence, for Adam was first formed, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in transgression. These verses are constantly thrown at me when people feel their worldview is threatened, because yes, I am a Jewish woman who speaks about why the Jewish people don't believe in Christianity. People leave comments like, go do your husband's laundry, you have to know your place. When a woman speaks, lies are heard, and this is why women don't teach. And quite honestly, I take it with a grain of salt. If anything, it just helps the algorithm. It doesn't affect me personally, but I do feel bad for the people who were so deeply affected by Paul's negative attitude that it affected their thinking, and it makes people think of women as less than worthy, as lower, as very bottom of the totem pole. It's a very sad situation that people actually think this about human beings. Now, here's a question you should be asking. If I don't agree with Paul about women being in submission to men, then why am I covering my hair? What is the rationale? Is it different from the Christian rationale? And the answer is yes. Let's explore this. In Numbers chapter 5, verse 18, we encounter the laws of a woman who is suspected of being in an adulterous relationship. She is brought forth to the Cohen, to the priest, and he uncovers her hair. And from this verse, we learn that a married woman has her hair covered. And moreover, we learn that marriage, intimacy, and the covering of hair are deeply entwined. They're intrinsically related. Now, let's go into this a little bit further. Let's flesh out the picture so you can walk away really understanding what is going on here. In Judaism, modesty is highly valued. And in fact, Micah tells us that God loves modesty so much. He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord demands of you, but to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk modestly with your God. All human beings are supposed to be modest, men and women. And modesty is so important in the Jewish life that Bilam, when he tried to curse the Jewish people, he couldn't even utter the curse. He ended up uttering blessings. And one of the things he said was, Ma toivu alech Yaakov, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Why was he talking about our tents? You see, when the Jewish people were in the desert, we pitched our tents in a manner that one entrance would not face the entrance of another tent in order to preserve family life, in order to preserve privacy. Because not everything that goes on inside of you or inside of your home is to be shared with the general public. We respect privacy, respect intimacy. Wisdom is knowing what to share with whom and how and when. Let me give you an example. If you have a bag full of diamonds, wisdom means you're not going to go walking on the street, wave them around in public and say, hey, I have diamonds, everybody come look, right? You're going to put them away in a safe, and you're going to take them out only for a select group of people who you trust, who you know are not going to abuse them, are not going to steal them, are not going to not appreciate what you have to show them. The same thing goes true with our bodies. Our bodies are not evil. Our bodies are a vehicle for doing God's commandments. They're a vehicle for holiness, and they need to be treated with respect, and they need to be concealed and only revealed at the appropriate times in the appropriate situation. So in Jewish law, an unmarried girl doesn't cover her natural hair. The hair releases a certain measure of sensuality into the air. It is attractive. There is something about it that lures men. And she is allowed, as long as it's not promiscuous, she's allowed to have her hair uncovered. She's allowed to use that to her advantage when she's in the unmarried state. Once she's committed to the marriage, however, that sensual nature is reserved for the intimacy between her and her husband. It moves from the public domain to the private domain. And that's why the woman suspected of adultery has her hair uncovered, because the woman who engaged in an adulterous relationship, potentially, she uncovered what was supposed to be private. She shared it with somebody who was not supposed to have access to it. That's the reason that the Kohen comes along and he takes off her head covering. He says, you took something from the private domain and you gave it to somebody who was not supposed to have access to it. And so this is what we're going to do. And he uncovers her hair. You see, that's what true modesty is. Modesty isn't about knowing your place, knowing that a man is better than you, being submissive to a man. No. Modesty, true modesty, is about having the dignity, having the wisdom to know what to share with whom, when, and how. It's about knowing that we are treasures and we protect our treasures. Displaying your treasures for just anybody is a serious issue. And in fact, we actually learned this from King Hezekiah, who made a big mistake. He allowed the emissaries from Babylonia to come inside of his treasure houses and see everything that was private. It was a serious mistake, and it was immortalized inside the pages of Tanakh for us to learn from. Now that we've spoken about what true modesty means, let's get back to Paul's negative view of women. When I read Paul's letters, I walk away with such a yucky feeling. I feel like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for poor Christian women. They're being told a message that is completely not consistent with the Hebrew Bible. I mean, yes, there are bad women inside of the Hebrew Bible, like Jezebel. And there are also great, amazing, wonderful women, such as the matriarchs. In fact, God told Abraham to listen to the voice of Sarah. You have women like Ruth and women like Esther. Esther, who saved the entire Jewish people and went on to write Megillah Esther, the book of Esther, together with Mordecai. You have women like Deborah, who was a spiritual guide during the era of Judges, a woman who men and women consulted, asking to tap into her wisdom. You know, when I mentioned this story one time, a Christian responded saying, oh, the only reason that the people relied upon Deborah is because it was a time of very weak leadership and there was no man of quality. If it was any different era, then nobody would have turned to Deborah for judgment. Nobody would have come to her to seek advice and wisdom. So I want to introduce you to another holy woman, Huldah. In the 22nd chapter of 2 Kings, we see the story about how King Josiah, a righteous king, a powerful king, gave money for the temple to be rebuilt. The temple had been in a state of disuse after years and years of wear and tear, and also abuse by his forebearers. And during the renovations, they found a Torah scroll that was written by Moses, and it was open to the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy, the Tochacha, the admonition. And when they found this, they told King Josiah, and he took it as a very serious omen, and he ripped his garment and he cried a great cry. And he wanted to make sure he was understanding this correctly, so he sent a delegation, which included Hilkiah, the high priest, and he sent them to Huldah, a prophetess and a teacher of Torah. He sent a delegation of great men to consult with a woman and ask her what to do. She relayed the prophecy of God, and they took her message back to Josiah, and Josiah instituted a mass repentance movement. And because of what Huldah had to say, Josiah went on a massive mission to destroy idolatry from Israel. And he didn't just stay in the southern kingdom. He didn't just wipe out all the different forms of idolatrous worship. He wiped out the Bamos, the high places, those places that were used for inappropriate worship of the one true God. He went even into the northern kingdom where he wasn't ruling over, the area where the northern kingdom had ruled and had set up idolatrous sites. And he destroyed them, and he killed the priests there. And I want you to think about this. The northern kingdom was an area that was very hostile. The 10 tribes had already been exiled, and they were replaced by very violent Samaritans. But King Josiah said, I don't care. This is the Holy Land. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to get rid of the idolatry. And he did so. He was a strong king. He was a powerful king. He was a righteous king. And he consulted with a woman. Now, lest you question how special Josiah was, let's read a verse. Now before him there was no king like him, who returned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his possessions, according to the entire Torah of Moses. And after him no one arose. So let's go ahead and lay this Narishkeit to rest. If a woman has the intellect and has the soul and has the desire to be able to learn Torah, to be able to learn the Bible and to be able to teach the Bible, and she can do it better than a man, and she can help men, what is this about women being quiet, women not being able to teach? Where does Paul get this idea from? This is not Torah. Inside of Jewish history, we have people like Bruria, a righteous woman who engaged with debate with Rabbi Tarfon. We have a sage inside of the Talmud who married a woman in order to learn Torah from her. We see the story of Miriam, who taught Jewish law to the most exceptional students in the academy. Women are capable of so much. So don't let Paul come along and tell you you're worthless. He has so many issues. He tells you not just that women are worthless, but he tells you human beings are worthless. He tells you you can't do anything to save yourself. Pauline theology is found nowhere inside of the Tanakh, nowhere inside of the real Bible, the Hebrew Scriptures. If you're a Christian lady, I feel for you. I feel so bad for you that this is the kind of theology that surrounds you. I want to read to you a small passage from a rabbi who wrote about women's Torah learning. He lived from the years 1515 to 1611. His name is Rabbi Shmuel Archivolti of Padua. Women whose hearts urge them to God's service of their own will shall ascend God's mountain and live in his holy place. For they are outstanding women, and the sages of the generation must glorify, exalt, and sustain them, encourage and strengthen them. And Torah shall go forth from their mouths. That's the attitude that the Torah teaches about Jewish women. Paul was so off base when he spoke about women and our role and who we are and what we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to live. He was so off base, so out of tune with the Jewish writings. Now, I want to be clear, if you've made it through this video, I want you to understand that the reason I don't believe in the Christian message is not because of the negative view of women. It's because the core tenets of Christianity are completely antithetical to that of the Hebrew Bible. Sin, salvation, the Messiah, everything that is taught inside of Christianity is completely contrary to the Hebrew Scriptures. And unfortunately, you won't be able to know that if you just go back and you read your Christian English translations, because there are so many errors, so many mistranslations. Unfortunately, what is presented to you inside of church is not in tune with the Hebrew Scriptures. So like, subscribe, and let's keep learning.